Donald Trump has also made good on a promise to slap 10% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States, and Beijing is already hitting back with new tariffs of its own. China's saying it would impose tariffs on imports of U.S. energy, vehicles, and equipment. It's the latest in the growing trade war between China and the U.S., the world's two biggest economies. And we're going to talk more about that now with Doug Herbert, who joins me on set. Doug, these China tariffs are still happening. We're seeing this blowback from Beijing. I mean, give us some more context here.
Well, the context is we're seeing blowback from Beijing. Look, the Chinese government's been very clear. They see this as an act of malice, a blunt weapon applied in a very sort of capricious, arbitrary manner, and which ultimately is going to boomerang right back in the U.S. face. We're already seeing it. Look, the tariffs that China has imposed in retaliation for Trump's 10% tariffs range from 10% to 15%. The biggest ones are on American liquefied natural gas or on coal, but you also have slightly lower tariffs on things like some types of vehicles, farm machinery. Beyond that, and this is also eye-raising, beyond the actual tariffs, we have China also imposing restrictions of certain exports, but not just any exports. Exports of certain types of critical minerals. Some people call them rare earths, including tungsten, things that are used for high-tech products, very important in U.S. manufacturing industry as well. So it's a mixture of all of these measures. And what's interesting in the case of China, you could say, fine, Trump's won, right? China hasn't really retaliated with a lot of firepower. These are relatively low tariffs. And it's true. China's economy has been under fire. It's under mounting problems with its stagnant growth and so on and so far. Perhaps it doesn't have a lot of ability to strike back, but it's held a lot of its powder dry. It's holding a lot in reserve. There's always a possibility, depending on how this pans out now, whether or not Trump continues to pursue this aggressive tariff policy, for China to sort of ramp up its tariff attack. Ultimately, the feeling in Beijing, but not just in Beijing, whether you're talking in the corridors of power here in Europe, whether you're talking in Canada or Mexico, the feeling is that this is counterproductive. It's an unnecessary, unjustified, sort of useless trade war, that dialogue, negotiation, always a much better way forward. And you're creating a lot of ill will among people who are supposedly, especially in the case of Canada and Mexico, your allies, your close allies. So there's a lot of rich irony in this using tariffs as this blunt weapon. Trump loves them. He sees them as politically effective. His base seems to lap it up, even if a lot of members of those base, including a lot of the farmers in the American heartland who presumably voted for Donald Trump, are ultimately hit by the boomerang backlash I was just talking about from these tariffs.
Well, let's talk a bit more about Canada and Mexico. I mean, those tariffs barely lasted 24 hours. Yeah. They almost immediately struck a deal. I mean, what happened there?
What happened there was basically, you could, depending on how you want to spin it, you could either say Canada and Mexico, basically folded under pressure from Trump. The tariff threat basically made them back down, or you could say that no, Trump actually is the one who folded here by calling off his threat to impose 25% blanket tariffs. Look, Trump says that for now it's a pause, right? He hasn't suspended it altogether. It's a 30-day pause. We'll see what happens coming down the pipeline around early March or so. He says the pause is because Canada and Mexico have agreed to strengthen, to help, to step up their border security measures, whether we're talking fentanyl drugs coming in through one border, whether we're talking about, Mexico deploying 10,000 members of its National Guard to the U.S.-Mexico border. All of this Trump can sell to his people as basically saying, you see, my threats worked. They're stepping up their security. Promises made, promises kept. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico can say the same things. Both Trudeau and Sheinbaum in Mexico could both say that ultimately Trump paused these tariffs, that it was Trump backing down after threatening to impose these tariffs. At the end of the day, the things that Trump is saying that Canada and Mexico have promised to do are things that they were doing anything, things that were in the pipeline. Mexico had already had programs underway dating back to the Biden administration, stepping up its border security. And migrants coming over to the border, I just may note, have been actually plummeting. The number has been going down and down and down. As for Canada, it has already been working on strengthening its own border security and helping the U.S. in combating organized crime. All of these things, prime concerns to the United States. So it's a matter of spin. Each side is going to spin it to make it look like it's a victory. But at the end of the day, what what most economists will agree on and what most world leaders and most of the U.S. allies will agree on is this is a counterproductive tariff policy. Already a lot of damage has been done in relations between the United States and a lot of its longstanding allies. And even if Trump were to come back tomorrow and withdraw all the tariffs, including the ones on China, you already have now an expectation that this is an unpredictable president engaged in malicious acts for his own ego.